January 3rd, 2026, 3:29 a.m. A bus driver from Caracas who rose to rule a nation sits in handcuffs aboard a U.S. warship. His 13-year reign as one of South America's most controversial leaders is over. His country sits on 300 billion barrels of oil, the largest reserves on planet Earth. And the United States just invaded to take him. But here's what nobody's asking. Who was Nicolás Maduro before the power? What really happened in Venezuela? And why now, after all these years, did America finally make its move? This is the full story, from the streets of Caracas to a Brooklyn jail cell, from revolutionary dreams to narco-terrorism charges. This is the rise and fall of Nicolás Maduro. November 23, 1962, Caracas, Venezuela. A boy is born into a working-class family. His father, a leftist labor organizer. His mother, a housewife in a cramped neighborhood where the smell of motor oil mixed with the aroma of arepas cooking on street corners. Young Nicolás Maduro didn't go to university. Instead, at 24 years old, he boarded a plane to Havana, Cuba, not for vacation, for indoctrination. The year was 1986, and communist Cuba was training young Latin American revolutionaries, teaching them Marxist theory, organizing tactics, and the art of political warfare. When Maduro returned to Venezuela, he got a job as a bus driver for the Caracas metro system. Picture this, a young man, barely in his 20s, driving a city bus through the chaotic streets of Venezuela's capital. But Maduro wasn't just driving buses. He was organizing, unionizing, radicalizing his fellow drivers. And then, in 1992, everything changed. A charismatic army paratrooper named Hugo Chavez attempted a military coup against Venezuela's government. It failed. Chavez was arrested, and sitting in that prison cell waiting for him was a young lawyer named Celia Flores. She would defend Chavez. She would also become Maduro's wife. Maduro joined Flores in campaigning for Chavez's release. They succeeded. By 1994, Chavez walked free. By 1998, he was elected president. And Nicolás Maduro, the bus driver turned union organizer, was about to ride that revolutionary wave all the way to the top. Here's how you go from driving buses to running a country. First, you become a member of the Constitutional Assembly in 1999, helping to rewrite Venezuela's constitution to concentrate power in the executive branch. Then you get elected to the National Assembly in 2000. By 2005, you're president of that assembly. In 2006, Chavez appoints you foreign minister, where you spend 6 years globetrotting, making alliances with Cuba, Russia, China, Iran, anyone who hates America. And then, in 2012, Hugo Chavez, dying of cancer, names you vice president. He goes on television and tells Venezuela, "If I die, vote for Nicolás Maduro. He's a true revolutionary, a man of the people." March 5, 2013. Chavez dies. Maduro becomes interim president. 1 month later, he wins a special election by the narrowest margin imaginable. His opponent claims fraud. The international community raises eyebrows, but Maduro doesn't care. He's president now. And that's when everything started falling apart. Imagine inheriting a country sitting on the world's largest oil reserves. You should be rich, right? Your people should be prosperous. But under Chavez and Maduro, Venezuela became a case study in how to destroy an economy. By 2014, less than a year into Maduro's first full term, supermarket shelves were empty. People were lining up for hours just to buy toilet paper. Inflation was skyrocketing, and Venezuelans took to the streets. Maduro's response? Crush them. Security forces attacked protesters, tear gas, rubber bullets, live ammunition. By the time the dust settled, 43 people were dead. Thousands arrested, and Maduro had revealed his true nature. In 2015, his party lost control of the National Assembly for the first time in 16 years. Did Maduro accept democracy? No. He created a new legislature, the Constituent Assembly, packed entirely with his loyalists. When protests erupted again in 2017, over 100 people died. The International Criminal Court opened an investigation. The world started calling him what he was, a dictator. But here's what most people don't know. While Maduro was crushing dissent above ground, he was building an empire underground, an empire of cocaine, weapons, and corruption. And that's where America's story begins. March 26, 2020, the United States Department of Justice unseals an indictment. Nicolas Maduro and 14 Venezuelan officials are charged with narco-terrorism. The allegations are staggering. According to U.S. prosecutors, starting in 1999, Maduro and his associates created something called the Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns. The name comes from the sun insignias on Venezuelan military uniforms. It was a criminal organization run by generals, politicians, and Maduro himself. Here's how it worked. The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, a terrorist organization, was producing massive amounts of cocaine. Maduro's government gave them safe haven in Venezuela, protected them, provided them with weapons. In exchange, the cocaine flowed through Venezuela to the United States. How much cocaine? The State Department estimated that by 2020, between 200 and 250 tons of cocaine were moving through Venezuela every single year. The indictment claims that Maduro didn't just allow this, he orchestrated it, negotiated multi-ton cocaine shipments, directed his cartel to provide military-grade weapons to FARC, used Venezuelan military bases as launching points for drug flights to Central America and the Caribbean. And the goal, according to prosecutors, wasn't just money. It was to flood the United States with cocaine, to use drugs as a weapon against America. The U.S. offered a $15 million reward for Maduro's capture. By 2025, Trump had raised it to $50 million. But Maduro stayed in Venezuela protected by his military, surrounded by loyalists, untouchable. Until he wasn't. July 28, 2024. Venezuela holds a presidential election. On one side, Nicolas Maduro, the dictator who had driven 7.7 million Venezuelans to flee their country, about 20% of the entire population. On the other side, a unified opposition led by an extraordinary woman named Maria Corina Machado. Machado was supposed to be the candidate. She won the opposition primary in a landslide, but Maduro's Supreme Court banned her from running. So she threw her support behind Edmundo Gonzalez, a 75-year-old diplomat. What happened next was one of the most brazen election thefts in modern history. Polls closed. Maduro's government-controlled electoral council announced he won with 51.95% of the vote. But they refused to publish detailed vote tallies. They refused to show the receipts. The opposition, brilliant and prepared, had stationed volunteers at 30,000 polling stations across the country. They collected tally sheets from 80% of voting machines. They published the results online for the world to see. Edmundo Gonzalez didn't lose, he won, by a landslide, 67% to 30%. The United States, the European Union, and dozens of countries refused to recognize Maduro's victory. They recognized Gonzalez as the legitimate president. In October 2024, Maria Corina Machado won the Nobel Peace Prize for her fight for democracy. And then came January 10, 2025, Maduro's inauguration day. He stood on a balcony in Caracas, draped in the Venezuelan flag, and gave a defiant speech. He compared himself to David fighting Goliath. He said his power came from the people, not from the United States. It was the last time he would stand on that balcony as president.
Now we need to talk about what this is really about. Oil. Venezuela sits on 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. That's 20% of the world's total. 4 times more than the United States. More than Saudi Arabia. More than any other nation on Earth. In the early 20th century, American companies like Standard Oil, Exxon, and Gulf developed Venezuela's oil industry. They brought the expertise, the technology, the capital. They turned Venezuela into an oil powerhouse. But in 1976, Venezuela nationalized its oil industry. The government seized control, kicking out foreign companies, creating the state-owned oil company PDVSA. American oil giants lost billions in assets. They were compensated, but nowhere near full value. Fast forward to 2007. Hugo Chavez goes further. He nationalizes remaining foreign oil projects. ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips are forced out. They sue in international court. A World Bank tribunal orders Venezuela to pay Exxon $1.6 billion. Venezuela never pays. Trump and his advisors, particularly Stephen Miller, started making an argument in late 2025. They claimed Venezuela stole American oil, stole American land, stole American wealth. Miller posted on social media, "American sweat, ingenuity, and toil created the oil industry in Venezuela. Its tyrannical expropriation was the largest recorded theft of American wealth and property." Is this true? Legally, no. Under international law, countries have permanent sovereignty over their natural resources. Venezuela's constitution explicitly states that all oil reserves belong to the Venezuelan people. The nationalization, while controversial, was legal. But Trump doesn't care about international law. He cares about power. And Venezuela's oil represents power. Here's where it gets interesting. Vice President J.D. Vance, after Maduro's capture, posted this. The president offered multiple off-ramps, but was very clear throughout this process. The drug trafficking must stop, and the stolen oil must be returned to the United States. The stolen oil must be returned to the United States. That sentence caused an explosion of criticism. Legal experts, foreign policy analysts, even some Republicans called it outrageous. They said Trump and Vance were admitting this was a war for oil. Vance doubled down. He posted, "You don't get to avoid justice for drug trafficking because you live in a palace in Caracas." But notice what he said first. The stolen oil. Not the drug trafficking. The oil. September 2025. The Trump administration begins a military buildup in the Caribbean. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, amphibious assault ships, the largest U.S. military presence in South America in decades. Trump orders strikes on boats allegedly carrying drugs. Since September, U.S. forces have killed more than 115 people in 35 separate attacks. Trump claims they're drug smugglers, but he provides no evidence, no arrests, no seized drugs, just dead bodies in the Caribbean. In August 2025, the CIA inserts a small team into Venezuela. Their mission, track Maduro's every move, where he sleeps, what he eats, where he travels, who he trusts. And they recruit an asset, someone inside Maduro's inner circle, someone who can pinpoint his exact location at any moment. Meanwhile, Delta Force operators are training. They build an exact replica of Maduro's compound. They practice the assault over and over, timing every movement, preparing for every contingency. December 2025. Trump approves the operation. But the weather isn't right. They wait. Days pass. New Year's Eve comes and goes. Then, on January 2nd, 2026, the cloud cover lifts, just barely. A dangerous window, but flyable. Trump gives the order. Go. What happened next we covered in our previous video. Over 150 aircraft, B-1 bombers, F-22 stealth fighters, Delta Force operators fast roping into Maduro's compound. Maduro in his gray sweatshirt trying to reach his panic room, failing, being dragged out like, as one official said, a dog. By 3:29 a.m., he's aboard the USS Iwo Jima. By Saturday afternoon, he's in a Brooklyn jail cell.
Here's where it gets complicated, and nobody, not even Trump, seems to know what happens next. Trump says the United States will run Venezuela until there's a safe and judicious transition, He says American oil companies will go in, fix Venezuela's broken infrastructure, and start pumping oil. But who will lead Venezuela? Trump initially said Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was being sworn in, but she appeared on Venezuelan television and said Maduro is the only president. She demanded his release. The opposition, led by Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez, says Gonzalez is the legitimate president. He won the election. He should take power. But here's Trump's response, and it's chilling. At his press conference, a reporter asked about Machado. Trump said, and I quote, "I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country." This is the woman who won a Nobel Peace Prize, who led the opposition to victory, who has 70% support from Venezuelans, and Trump says she doesn't have support. Why? Because Trump doesn't want an independent Venezuelan leader. He wants someone who will cooperate with American oil companies, someone who will let American corporations take control of Venezuela's resources. This isn't about democracy. This isn't about drug trafficking. This is about 300 billion barrels of oil. Let's zoom out for a second, because this isn't just about Venezuela. At his press conference, a reporter asked about Cuba. His response, "I think Cuba is going to be something we'll end up talking about, because Cuba is a failing nation right now. It's very similar to Venezuela. We want to help the people." Help the people? By invading? Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, has spent his entire political career obsessed with Cuba. He's Cuban-American. He hates the communist government, and now he's in a position to do something about it. Cuba keeps Venezuela alive with cheap oil. Without Venezuelan oil, Cuba's economy collapses even faster. So if America controls Venezuela's oil, it can strangle Cuba economically. And that's just the beginning. Colombia shares a border with Venezuela. Trump mentioned Colombia too, said its leaders should be concerned. This is Trump's new doctrine for Latin America. If you don't cooperate with the United States, if you don't give us what we want, we will remove you by force.
Let's be clear about something. Nicolas Maduro is not a good person. He's a dictator. He stole an election. He crushed dissent. He presided over the collapse of Venezuela's economy while millions of his people fled starvation. The narco-terrorism charges against him, there's evidence to support them. Venezuela has been a transit point for cocaine. Corruption in his government is well documented. But here's the problem. The United States just invaded a sovereign nation, bombed its capital, kidnapped its leader, all without congressional approval, all without a declaration of war. Democratic senators are calling it illegal. Republican Senator Brian Fitzpatrick said the only country the United States of America should be running is the United States of America. International law experts say this violates the UN Charter. It sets a dangerous precedent. If America can invade Venezuela to arrest its leader, what stops it from invading any country? And the oil claims? Multiple legal experts, including Venezuelan economists, called Trump's stolen oil narrative baseless. One professor said that claim would have been laughed out of court if it was about oil. So here's my personal take. And I want to be very careful here because this is complex. Maduro deserved to be held accountable, not necessarily by a U.S. military invasion, but through international justice systems, through supporting Venezuela's democratic opposition, through economic pressure and diplomatic isolation. But this operation wasn't about justice. It was about oil. It was about demonstrating American power in the hemisphere. It was about sending a message to Cuba, to Nicaragua, to any Latin American country that doesn't fall in line. And that terrifies me,
because it means the United States is willing to wage war, risk American lives, kill foreign civilians, and violate international law for economic gain. J.D. Vance's comment about stolen oil revealed the truth. This administration sees Venezuela's natural resources as American property. That's not justice. That's imperialism.
So where does Venezuela go from here? Best case scenario, the United States recognizes Edmundo Gonzalez as the legitimate president. Machado leads a democratic transition. Free elections are held. American companies invest in rebuilding Venezuela's oil infrastructure, but under Venezuelan control, with fair contracts that benefit the Venezuelan people. Worst-case scenario, the U.S. installs a puppet government. American oil companies take control of Venezuela's resources. The wealth flows north while Venezuelans remain in poverty. Cuba is next, then maybe Colombia, and Latin America descends into a new era of American military intervention. The reality? Probably somewhere in between. Messy, complicated, with winners and losers. What we do know is this: Venezuela's military didn't fight back. There was no resistance when Delta Force came for Maduro. That suggests one of two things. Either the military was so incompetent and unprepared that they couldn't respond, or, more likely, elements within Venezuela's leadership made a deal with the United States. Maybe they agreed to step aside if they received immunity. Maybe they're negotiating for a piece of the oil wealth. We don't know yet, but the ease of the operation suggests this wasn't purely a military action. It was partly a coup. Nicolas Maduro started as a bus driver with revolutionary dreams. He wanted to fight for the poor, to challenge American imperialism, to build a socialist paradise in Venezuela. He ended as a dictator in a Brooklyn jail cell, facing life in prison for narco-terrorism. What went wrong? How did the revolution become a narco-state? How did a man who claimed to fight for the people become the architect of their suffering? Power. Unchecked power. When you concentrate power in one person, when you eliminate democratic checks and balances, when you silence dissent and crush opposition, you don't get a hero, you get a tyrant. Chavez built that system, Maduro inherited it, and Venezuela paid the price. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. If Maduro is guilty of abusing power, of using violence to maintain control, of putting economic interests above human rights, then what does it say about the United States? We just invaded a sovereign nation, killed over 100 people in boat strikes, bombed a capital city, installed ourselves as the unelected rulers of a foreign country, and we're doing it for oil. The charges against Maduro are real. The crimes he committed are real. But so are the crimes being committed in his name by a country that claims to fight for democracy while acting like an empire. So, as Maduro sits in his cell and as Venezuela's future hangs in the balance, ask yourself this: who really won here? The Venezuelan people or American oil companies? And if history is any guide, we already know the answer.